And welcome to today's Story Live. And I'm delighted today to welcome my colleague April Harris. Hi, April, and welcome to Story Live.
Hi, Rachel. It's lovely to be here.
Good, good. So, April, we've met fairly recently, haven't we, within the last few months?
Yes, yeah.
We met at an Athena Network meeting. And for those of you who haven't been to an Athena meeting, we go around the room finding out who's there and what they do. And I could see immediately that there was a synergy between what April and I do. So, April, over to you to explain what it is that you do, and also to give us your backstory, if you would, as how you came to be doing it.
Well, I'm a lifestyle blogger. I'm a writer and a speaker as well. I've been blogging since 2002 at apriljharris.com. Apriljharris.com is a website designed to empower and encourage modern women and their families. We do recipes, travel, style. There's a really heavy emphasis on food because that's one of my passions is cooking and vintage recipes. Over the years, I've managed to build up my community to about 33,000 people a
Wow.
month. And we have a really friendly community. The readers are in touch with each other and it's really lovely. I think that we've got so much social media going on. It's nice to sort of create that community aside from that in a bit more of a real way.
Mm.
I started blogging back when my son was very, very small because as a housewife, every time I went out to an event, people would say, well, what do you do with your time? Aren't you bored? And I became so frustrated that I started to write around that. And eventually that became a website.
Fascinating, because I think, certainly in business, we all, or not all, but most of us write the occasional blog. I probably write about one a month or something. But a professional blogger is something else again. So do you want to explain a bit more about that? What's the difference between somebody who writes a blog for the heck of it and then how that evolves, I suppose, into becoming a professional blogger?
That's a really good way of putting it because that is very much how it started. I just put it out there because I thought, well, I'm going to get my point of view out there. I'm going to share and perhaps going to help some other women who are feeling the same way. As time wears on and you start to develop an audience, it's possible to begin working with brands. So one of my favorite ways of working with brands is to do sponsored posts. So if there's a brand I particularly like, I'll work with them and they will get a post on my website that gives them traffic. Other bloggers might want to advertise in a more obvious way. Sometimes when you go to a blog, there's advertisements pop up. I don't do that necessarily. But I've worked with brands like John Lewis, HelloFresh, Expedia, and I try to work with brands that I feel my audience is really going to be interested in and also brands that I trust.
Okay. So how did you build your audience though? Because back in 2002, we didn't have social media in the way we do now, did
No,
we?
social media has changed things a lot. Back
Mm.
in 2002, I really didn't realize there were a lot of other people out there like me. And then gradually you started to realize that, people would get in touch by email or eventually you could have comments on your blog. But one of the main ways I started in the beginning was they used to do link parties, and I still do one of those where other bloggers come and link up to your website and share and connect and get to know one another. And my reach started to expand through those. And then I did get noticed in the press a few times as well. So the website would get a mention here and there, and people would come because of that. And most of them would stay, which was nice. So it developed in that way.
But how would somebody have even found the website back in 2002?
Um, it would have had to have been either by someone telling them, because of course,
Okay.
before the search engines were
Yeah.
up there, it was more difficult. I mean, it would be, for example, I was mentioned in The Guardian very early on. They were looking at websites for housewives, and one
Okay.
of the articles literally mentioned, because at that time I was branded as the 21st Century Housewife. I still use that brand, but that was my URL.
I see.
And now I write at apriljharris.com. It's just a little clearer and easier to find.
So how long do you think it took you before you could monetize your blogging?
Monetizing, I mean, I didn't actually try that hard in the beginning. And in terms of monetizing, you can do it much more quickly now. If you set out to monetize, you could do it within a very short period of time, probably about a year. But again, you've got to build up your traffic so that you can, the more traffic you have, the more of an engaged audience you have, the more you can charge and the more viable it is. I mean, there are bloggers who will do posts, they'll monetize a blog for say 10 or 15 pounds. I mean, I charge about 200 to 300 pounds to do a sponsored post. So it's once you get that audience, there, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your background? I mean, this was something you did once you were a mum, is that right? And
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've always been a writer and I've always
okay.
written. And that was something that was always a passion of mine. But I did start writing this series of essays when I started to, once I had my son and I was feeling frustrated and stuck because people were thinking I wasn't doing anything fulfilling. And actually I was finding it very fulfilling indeed. Thank you very much. So I started to write, thinking perhaps it would be a book, perhaps it would be a collection of essays. And it was my husband who was involved in the very early days of B2B commerce, who said to me, you need a website. And I was like, what? So we kind of went from there. And I think that it was a way of trying to encourage other women so that was where the connection first formed, because there were a lot of other people like me out there feeling that same level of like, I'm actually doing something really interesting, something really important, and something I find really fulfilling. Not to the exclusion of everyone else, and not saying that, you shouldn't be out there with a career if you wanted one. But it was interesting how what became my sort of celebration of what I was doing kind of ended up becoming a career.
Yeah, interesting. So how did you introduce yourself? Because I know that one of the things people struggle with when they've stopped work to have a child is that thing of what they say when they meet somebody at a party and they say, and what do you do? There's that sort of fear of the person moving on when you say, well, I'm a housewife. So how did you describe yourself at that point? Because actually you were almost a professional housewife by then, weren't you?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that is one of the URLs that I purchased, and one of the things that I worked around, and actually how The Guardian found me, because I was saying professional housewife. But at a party, if someone just asked me, I would say I am a housewife. The one thing I wanted to avoid was the just a housewife, because you don't say I'm just a surgeon or I'm just an accountant. So and that was one of the first things I was really passionate about, was saying to women, well, say you're a housewife, or say whatever version of that you want to say. And just own it, because there's nothing wrong with it. It's a really important thing. It doesn't mean that if your children are in nursery that you're not doing it correctly. It just means that you're doing it differently, but it's okay for people to look after their own kids as well. And it can be fulfilling and interesting. And it doesn't all have to be, boring and insular. It's quite different indeed.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I years and years ago, I used to work for Laker Airways. I don't know if you would
I do remember, yes. Yeah.
And so I ended up being made redundant when Laker Airways went under. And that was one of the hardest things I found, as what to say, because I didn't, for a while I was unemployed. And somebody said, but how come? Because you never talk about your job anyway. But it's that feeling of not being interesting because you don't do anything. So I'm completely with you on that. Yeah.
I agree. It's very, I mean, and I think that it was true though, that people would sometimes, when you said, oh, I'm a housewife, they'd be just like, oh, well, what do you do with your time? And then they'd be talking to someone else. And it was like, well, if you wait for me to answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some people change it, don't they? Say I'm a homemaker, or
yes. And in fact, just as I started, just as I kind of owned that brand, the 21st Century Housewife, the Women's Institute came out and said, well, maybe we shouldn't be using that word anymore. Maybe that's detrimental. And I was like, oh my goodness, please don't do that. But actually that was great fodder for some articles and essays and some work in the press as well, which was great. So
do you write about all sorts of things that come into the role of being a housewife, domestic manager, however people want to describe?
I do, but I'm definitely not Mrs. Hinch. I'm not going to tell people how to look after their houses, nor am I going to suggest that, I'm a little more, I was never not inclusive, but I consider myself to be much more inclusive now. I would say that, the majority of my audience are not necessarily housewives.
Okay.
They're predominantly women. There are some men, but they're predominantly women. Their age group is about 24 to 65. And it's a real cross section. I have women who are very, they're CEOs, but they're very into cooking and entertaining and that sort of thing. And then that's the appeal. But I do still try to provide that kind of support for women who are saying, oh my goodness, everyone's telling me that this isn't fulfilling, this isn't a career. There's still information available for them, as well as just generally to encourage people. One of the articles I'm most proud of is the one that I wrote about Just As You Are, because there's so much pressure on people to be something other than what they are and to fix all the things that are wrong with them. And actually, as women, we need to support one another and encourage one another, whatever role we're in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For me, that choice, that personal choice, it's, as you say, it's whether you choose to be a full-time mum and have a full-time nanny, or whether you choose to do the whole thing yourself. There's absolutely no right or wrong, and it's my firm belief that you are going to be a better parent, not just mothers, when you find some, whatever works for you. It's when you're having to go back to work and don't want to, or for whatever reason, feeling you have to stay at home.
Exactly. And you don't want to, I think the whole crux of it, and one of the things that I used to find quite upsetting was people would say, well, you're not a feminist then. And I'm very much a feminist. Feminism is about choice.
Yes.
And that choice to do whatever it is that you want to do. And I think, you can't always I know women who are housewives who would rather be working full time. I know women who are working full time who would rather be housewives, but we don't all have the gift of that choice. But equally, it should be available. It shouldn't be an either or.
No. And men too. And we are now
seeing
number of couples, aren't we, where they decide for whatever reason, whether it's financial, emotional, practical, that actually it's the dad is going to be the primary carer.
And I agree. And I think I one of the things I do endeavor is to help people make the most of their family life, whatever form that family takes. We don't have a lot of we don't have and it's quite good that we don't have this traditional family setup anymore. And it's lovely that there are so many different ways to be a family. And I want the website to be a resource for everyone so that they can make the most of whatever their definition of family is.
Yeah, absolutely. So describe for us then, April, so that started presumably when your son was quite young and small, did it?
Yes. Yeah, it was so 2002, he was only about 4 or 5. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So presumably, I'm guessing here now, because I know we have spoken about it, but I can't remember the detail, forgive me, but presumably the business that came from blogging kind of developed as he got older and that little bit more independent. Would that be right? Because you're doing
Yes, he wasn't the right age for, now it's much more acceptable and it can be quite cool. And I think some of the kids find it quite a lot of fun to actually, for some of the mummy bloggers to work in that, in that sphere of being, having their children work with them and, do cooking with them in the kitchen and stuff like that. He was kind of, by the time I got to the stage where I could monetize and do that sort of thing, he was kind of like, I don't want people to know what you do. Thanks, but I'll pass. So I didn't really get into that side of it. That could have, I often wonder, because he was one of those children who loved to be photographed when he was very little. And, it could have been really interesting, but timing didn't work out that way. But yeah, for me, monetizing really didn't start until I dabbled in it in sort of the past 10 years, but it's the past sort of 5 years where I've been looking at it more seriously.
Okay. And so now, as I say earlier, we met through a network. So you're out there networking, doing social media, presumably, and doing everything that anybody else with any other kind of business does, really.
Yes. And I think, at the moment for me, my key focus is still building my audience, because I am working on a cookbook of vintage recipes and I want to write around other things as well. So for me, I have the luxury at the moment of my focus being building the audience. So the amount of work I do is very selected. And you can do as much, well, depending on what your traffic is and how you feel, you can do as much or as little as you like. At the moment, I'm not doing as much, but I am working on some selected clients. The other thing that I do is I have been working with entrepreneurs on blogging for your business coaching. So, so people because blogging can be a really good way of drawing people to your website and your services. It's not for everyone, but it can be a really good way of driving traffic to your offer, to what you do. So I've been working with individual clients on that as well.
Okay. And just to avoid you having lots of inquiries that aren't going to be that helpful to you, do you ever do the blogging for them, or do you just show them how to do it?
I'm not a copywriter. I tend to show people how to do it. It's not something I would rule out completely, but it's not my, I'm happier in writing for my own blog, but I'm quite happy when I do the blogging for your business coaching. I will help people with individual things and say, well, this is how you could do it. But no, I'm not a copywriter.
No. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So April, I know that you had a story that you particularly wanted to share. I always ask people to share a story and to share some learning from it, because we've all got hundreds of stories and stuff. And there is learning just by listening to a story, but we have to find that meaning and learning for ourselves. And I think it's always really useful when the speaker draws that learning out. And you, I know you do a lot of speaking, don't you? So, so what's your story for our listeners today, April?
Well, my story is a little bit about me, and it's how things aren't always as they appear. Now, you may have heard that I have a bit of an accent, and you may think that I haven't been here very long, but I've actually lived in the UK for over 30 years. Now, when I first got to the UK, one of the things I really wanted to do was fit in. And I felt that it wasn't going to be a problem because my grandparents were from England and I'd grown up in a family that was very much Anglophiles. My grandfather was a Cockney. I was very used to all different, I thought, phraseology and turns of phrase. So I was pretty confident that when I got here, and having grown up in Canada, the spellings as well, we spelt O-U-R, it isn't like the American spellings or anything. So I was pretty darn confident that we weren't going to have any issues in that regard at all. And I had no idea what I was in for. In retrospect, it's very funny. At the time, it made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but it has made me realize that sort of things aren't always as they appear. So one of the first problems I got into was I was staying with my cousins in the beginning, and they were really very kind. And I was working in temping, and I was being paid in cash because I couldn't have a bank account because I was new to the country. And I mislaid my purse. And by what I meant by purse was very different to what they thought. And I was running around looking for my purse, and my cousin came in holding my wallet saying, "I've got your purse." And I said, no, the big purse. He went, "It is the big purse." And of course we were looking for the handbag. And he said, and I said, "Well, no, I mean the big purse that it sits in." He went, "Oh, your handbag." I said, "We don't have to get cross with me," because of course handbag is very formal in Canada. So the purse and handbag thing was the first one that I kind of came across. I met my husband very early on, and he wasn't my husband at that time, but he was my boyfriend. And we built up a circle of friends, and we were going out for dinner one evening, and we all decided to change. And there was still some people around, people had things with them. And I turned to him and I said, "Well, are you going to wear your dress pants to the restaurant?" And everyone burst out laughing. And I don't understand. And of course, in Canada, underpants are very clearly delineated.
Okay.
So you would be wearing, and if you said dress trousers, that wouldn't work in Canada at all.
Okay.
So everyone was on the floor laughing their heads off at me. And I was mortified because I had no idea what they were laughing at. Now there's definitely pictures in my head. And my husband did go through quite a lot with me because he came home from work one day and he said, "Oh, I'm so chuffed, I've had a promotion." And I was like, "Well, why are you upset?" Because of course, chuffed is not a word in Canada. That would be you were upset and chuffed up about something, as opposed to really proud and excited. So, but things really got started when my son was little.
Yes.
And was just about to go to school. And anyone who has kids that are of school age will probably, well, I don't know, it might come by email now, but you get the big package through the post that tells you everything that your child needs to go to school. Right. And I had all the list of the uniform, and I was fine with everything. It took me a little while to get my head around the fact that my son was going to be wearing shorts in the wintertime, but I was okay. I was going to be all right with that. And then I came to the item on the list that said cagoule. And I was like, cagoule. And I had no idea what the heck a cagoule was. And I was too embarrassed to ask my friends because I didn't want to stand out or be different. I didn't want to ask my in-laws for the same reason. So I walked into a uniform shop with my little boy in tow, stood directly in front of the cagoules, and asked the sales lady where they were, hoping that she would point vaguely off in another direction. Of course, they were square in front of me. And it took me such a long time to realize that, it was a raincoat, but at least I sort of didn't have to feel like I hope she just thought I was unable to see, as opposed to, you know, didn't know what it was. In Canada, even though cagoule is French, you would use literally l'anorak or la coup de vent, so like windbreaker.
Yes.
So there was just no frame of reference. But I was even more flummoxed by plimsolls. I
Oh,
could not figure out what a plimsoll was, and it sounded very flimsy.
yeah.
And I was trying to figure out what it was, but then when I did see them, I thought, well, why aren't they wearing more sturdy shoes? But then I realized they're just kind of they weren't really for PE. They were more for just being in school and not wearing their great big shoes.
Yes.
Got over the hurdle of having my son and the language with that. And then we moved to the Midlands, where everything changed.
Right. Yeah. But at least that would have been a change for your husband as well, presumably.
Yes, it was. I will never forget I went into the shopping center for the first time, and there was at that point, people were very friendly, chatty, and there was a group of gentlemen standing there, and another gentleman joined them. They must have been in their 60s. And the gentlemen who were standing there talking, the one turned to the gentleman who was joining them and went, "Hey up, me duck." And I was like, what language is this? And I started to temp while I was there, again, because my son was of an age where I wanted to go out and do a little bit of work. So I went into a really lovely office one day, and they were super friendly there. And I'd come in sort of late in the morning. They had a bit of an emergency, and we'd been working through. And one of the chaps turned to me and said, "Would you like some chips getting or a chip butty?" And I was like, "What?" And of course, he was offering to go and get me some chips or a chips sandwich, which of course is a lovely thing, but I didn't know that at the time. Cobs were another hurdle.
Okay.
Did I want a cob of what exactly?
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I think the regional differences. I mean, you mentioned plimsolls. You know, in some parts of the country, they're daps, but in
I hadn't heard that.
another part of the country, a dap is something else. See, for me, plimsolls or daps would be interchangeable. And as you say, they are sort of almost an indoor sport kind of shoe.
Yes, yeah.
Because we didn't have trainers then in the way we
No.
now. So we probably did wear our plimsolls or daps outside for PE.
Yeah, it was so interesting.
But then you've got the thing with muffin and crumpets and all those
Definitely, definitely.
Muffin in the south of England is different from northeast, and probably different again in the Midlands. It's fascinating.
And I think as well with inflections and things like that can be so interesting, because words like so with the deepest of respect, if a Canadian says to you with the deepest of respect, they mean seriously with the deepest of respect. Whereas here I'm saying to you with the deepest of respect, I'm kind of like, I'm kind of cross with you now. And the don't worry, you would, just when someone would say to me, I would ask a question and they'd say, well, don't worry. And I'd be like, well, no, I am worried. Tell me the answer to the question. So that was, it's just those inflections and those little combinations of phrases. And it's like here, if you say, oh, I was quite pleased about that, it's just okay. Whereas if you're quite pleased in Canada, it's like, oh, I'm really, actually, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So that can cause the things as well. So even if you think you've got it all figured out and you're totally prepared, there are things that you might never expect. And equally, things may not be just as they seem.
Okay, so that's your that's your learning from those stories, is it?
Definitely, yeah.
Great. I think that's great. Because as I say, I think, it's still the same, isn't it? From whether it's across the water to the States or Canada, different words. I'm working with somebody who's a foreign national at the moment, and he's finding that with his phraseology that he uses, there's nothing wrong with his English at all, but he comes out with what I would describe as some old-fashioned or quaint phrases.
Yes.
And then he's hearing all these phrases, and quite often our session will begin with a list of 2 or 3 phrases that he wants me to clarify and explain to him what they mean, because often they're very simple everyday phrases in English, but he just hasn't come across them.
And it's interesting how what people actually hear, because when I first went back to, I mean, I've found my feet now, and obviously I speak the way I speak now, and I don't sort of try to do anything. But when I first started going back to Canada on visits, I had been trying to fit in England, and I was using a lot of the phraseology and the terms that I was learning, and some of the slang and the terms that I've just discussed. And people were like, oh, you've lost your accent completely. You sound like you're from England. And of course, to someone from England, I didn't. Yes. But when people, they pick up those phrases and they just hear what they want to hear, what they think they hear, not necessarily what's actually there.
Yes, I think that's right, actually, isn't it? And that's the thing with accents, isn't it? I remember one of my very first trips to the States, and, you know, I'd not been to it was just a sort of one of these chain cafes, I think, and of course they're very keen to pour you water, which now in England does happen much more.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I don't think it was done as a matter of course unless you asked for it in England. Certainly not the minute you walk in the door, and
No.
You want any water?
Yeah.
I asked her about 6 times before I could get that actually what she was offering me was water. Now I felt very prim going, oh, water. But she was saying water. And
it makes me laugh that you chose that particular one, because that is the one that gets me every time when I get off the plane, because I'll walk into, you know, if I'm going into, like, I don't know, if we're buying a bottle of water, and I'll ask in Canada for a bottle of water, and they go, pardon? What do you want? Because certain words you just get used to saying a certain way, and you don't.
Would they say water in Canada?
Water.
Oh, it would be water. Yeah, but that, yes, which I can get now. But she was, I think she had a particularly strong Californian accent, so it was very much water.
Yeah, and it is those words, when you don't hear it the way you expect to, yes. Even something that, you know, afterwards you think, wow, I should have got that. Actually, it's really hard.
Because the clue was she was there with a jug and a glass.
Oh, well, even without that. Yeah, and there are all sorts of things that are different. Like it's still I still notice it now when I go to North America, so I've gotten so used to here. Whereas if you're in a restaurant here and they wait till everyone's finished to clear the plates, in Canada and the States, they often whisk one plate away because, you know, you don't want to sit there looking at your empty plate. But now when they do that and it's me, I'm like, why did you take my plate? Everyone else is still eating. You know,
it's interesting, isn't it? That is adapt. Because that's interesting you've picked on that one, because that's one that really annoys me. And it's only just now occurred to me that, of course, in our hospitality business here, and I'm talking now more normal times, of course, it's so often foreign nationals that are serving, and they may have a different norm.
Exactly, exactly. Why would you want to look at your empty plate? It's like, well, because everyone else still has a plate.
Yes. And for somebody who's a slow eater, as I am, I find it really quite annoying that everybody else's plate is cleared, making me feel even worse for being the last to finish.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes, but it's
so funny.
Yeah, there are so many habits that people can get very uppity because they think people are being rude. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and I think she is from Slovenia, somewhere like that. And what she had to learn when she first came to this country was that we all say thank you when we've been served. You know, we might go in to get a takeaway coffee or something like that. She will have said please when she asks for it, but it's just not in their normal way of doing things, a need to say thank you. But she said she got, you know, people would say, oh, and thanks very much. You know, people would be quite uppity because she didn't say thank you. And she said it wasn't that she wasn't grateful or meaning to be rude. It just wasn't what she'd been brought up to do, or that anybody did in her country.
I notice people acknowledge thank you more here, but of course, growing up in Canada, we were always taught to say you're welcome when someone said thank you. And when I first arrived in the 80s, it was like people didn't say you're welcome. And I was like, I said thank you. And I was kind of waiting and nothing would happen. It happens more now, but yes,
interesting. We could talk for hours, April, about these different.
It's true, yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your stories and for sharing, you know, about your business and how you came into it. How can people find you, April, to either listen to read your blog or to find out more about you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rachel. You can find my blog at www.apriljharris.com. And I am on Facebook as the 21st Century Housewife. I'm on Instagram as April J. Harris. You can find me most places as April J. Harris, actually. I'll pop the links down in the comments on the live, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I will see you at another meeting at some point.
Thank you so much again for having me, Rachel.